This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Okay, welcome back to the final episode of our series with Madeleine from PCR in Hawaii, where we are talking about how coffee leaf rust has really become a problem in the Hawaii coffee producing community. Now, we've talked about a number of things. We've talked about what coffee leaf rust is. We've talked about how it's impacting coffee producers and how it's how it's impacting the consuming end of the supply chain. And in the last episode, we talked about what's being done to address coffee leaf rust. As with every great story, there's the part that is not being told, and that is what needs to be done that isn't being done. The part of this story that really fascinates me the most and is really kind of how Madeleine and I got talking about this and led us to have this conversation. There's a couple of really interesting elements of this story. Hawaii isn't the first country to get coffee leaf rust. Hawaii is the last country to get coffee leaf rust. It's also the first very rich country to get coffee leaf rust. And the countries that have had to combat coffee leaf rust before now have obviously come up with solutions. They've come up with seeds. They've come up with a whole bunch of solutions to this problem. The one thing that wasn't in the solutions that we heard in the last episode and from our previous conversations, I don't hear conversations between the organizations that you mentioned in the last episode and other producing countries that have already dealt with this problem. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is actually a question that actually a producer brought up in the last meeting with all of these different entities of like, why are we not just even importing plant material from Colombia or anywhere in the world really that has these resources to plant material and bringing them here? And you know, the official response is, well, we needed to know, you know, what strain of rust we had first. And you can't just bring seeds in for a lot of these varieties, these hybrid varieties. You need to have the tissue culture, or, well, you still need to go through all of the correct means of bringing that coffee in first from a foreign country into the United States. There's all sorts of rules and regulations of just bringing coffee seeds into the nation. And then Hawaii has its own regulations as well for bringing plant material in. And, you know, I talked about that required quarantine, and it's a required 1-year quarantine for any plant material brought into Hawaii. And so, you know, the question was like, well, is 1 year still shorter than however long it's going to take for all of these other things to get done, you know?
Right.
However long it's going to take for these other agencies and organizations to do the research they need to do and the testing that they need to do. Like, is 1 year still shorter? And should we just like try to do this? And people don't really have an answer, it seems like. And they're like, well, it could be shorter. It could be shorter to wait for these agencies to do the thing. But it also depends on like, if this person does the thing they're supposed to do first, and this person does the thing they're supposed to do. And in this same meeting, you know, one of the people working in these research centers was saying, oh, I'm still waiting on approval for my import permit. It's called a controlled import permit. So to bring in plant
Wow.
And like, I'm still waiting for mine to be approved so I can bring in these other varieties so that we can start doing research on these other hybrids. And you're just like, okay, how long is this going to take? You know? And so if we are trying to work with other nations, what has been helpful is like the information, right? So much research has been done. So there's a lot of information out there already. But what hasn't come of that at all is the practical application on the farm level of being able to apply solutions of planting new varieties, right, on farms. And it ends up being this thing of like, well, if you want to do that, you still have to go through all of these other forums to have that happen. And who knows how long it's going to take for you to get this import permit for plant material. And then when that happens, okay, well, now it needs to go to the mainland United States first, and then it needs to come to Hawaii, but then you have to quarantine it for a year. So this is looking like all of a sudden a whole
How frustrating
process. And so, and with that, as I said before, these quarantine facilities really aren't set up in an ideal way at all for coffee seedlings. And so a producer who might be willing to take on that task also has to kind of just accept the fact that whatever they bring in, they're going to lose a decent percentage of it because it's just going to die, and they have to be okay with that. So I do want to say there are solutions that already exist here. Mm-hmm. And these solutions are through people who have brought in coffee seedlings here illegally. Mm-hmm. And they've had them for years. This is not something that happened in response to Coffee Leaf Rust. These are just producers who kind of like saw this coming down the pipeline. Or people who just figured this is probably going to happen eventually. Or people who wanted to just like bring in varieties without running the risk of like having them all die in quarantine. Or didn't want to go through the whole process of getting this controlled import permit. Mm-hmm. And so there are people here who have access to rust-resistant varieties. There are people here who are growing them. And there are people here who are doing cuppings and seeing what the quality of those varieties is coming out to. And they're trying to answer that question of, is it worth me planting more of this? And is it worth it for me to start giving these to other producers too, who are asking me about it because they know that I have this, or they heard that I might have it, you know? And I think that is a great solution, especially if they are varieties that we know, because we know what the strain of the rust is, especially if they're varieties that we know are resistant to the strain that we have here. So it makes sense. The issue is that because they have done this illegally,
they've allegedly done this
illegally. Yeah. They like can't come out and say this. They can't come out and publicize this and do these big distributions to other producers, because then they'll get in trouble. Right? And they face the legal ramifications of that. And so it's this whole like...
Which is so fucked. I want to go on record by saying that. It's so fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. And there has been a request from the Hawaii Coffee Association to provide these folks with amnesty from the Department of Agriculture, from the powers that be. And that request was denied. And they're not going to provide amnesty to these people. And it's a shame
because of the precedents that it might set?
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's probably what. Yeah. So this is just the way that like bureaucracy really gets in the way sometimes. And yeah, I mean, just if you're, you know, tapped into the right networks of people, you hear conversations that are happening and the way that this is all kind of operating under the radar, and kind of it's like this clandestine movement that is going on, you know. And what could happen instead is these folks being given amnesty and being told you're not going to face any legal ramifications for this, and you know what, we can actually have you help us find a solution for this, and we can work with you to do this. And so that's one huge thing that I wish that we could have happen. It just really does not seem like these folks are going to be budging on it. It doesn't seem like they want to.
Which is asinine. I mean, here we have a group of people who has been working on the problem years ahead of when it actually showed up in the main society, main community. They have a solution, and because of bureaucracy, it can't be implemented.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's just going to, it's stunting progress to find a solution that folks can implement in the immediate future, you know? And so that's a big thing. And the other thing, which, I mean, I kind of touched on in the last episode, is that these quarantine facilities just are not adequate for our needs. And I heard this statistic recently that the greenhouses and nurseries, so not just quarantine facilities, but greenhouses and nurseries are something that are also severely lacking here. But the current capacity for these research centers, their greenhouses and nurseries, is at about 10,000 trees a year, where the projected need is for 100,000 trees a year.
Oh, that's so hilarious.
And so the amount of infrastructure that is required for these greenhouses and nurseries, and improving the facilities and updating them and expanding them, I mean, that needs attention right now too, because even if we were to be able to propagate something, we're not going to be able to do it at the levels that we need to, and at least not as these facilities stand now. And the quarantine facilities go hand in hand with that. We don't have enough of them, and we don't have enough trained personnel to employ those quarantine facilities. And it really is it's a huge shame that those two bills that were aimed at attacking that problem died in the legislative session. And I want to hold on to hope that something still will come of it, but I'm
not optimistic.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if it will.
It sounds like if things continue the way that they're going, we're going to watch the demise of a very successful coffee producing economy. Not to mention how big the clusterfuck is going to be for organic coffee producers who choose not to use fungicides and things like that. From what I understand it, people are being given an incentive to fumigate or to spray fungicides, right?
Yeah. So there's a rebate program, basically. So producers who are using these can get, I can't remember what percentage it is, but their money back, a percentage of their money back on the investment made into these fungicides. And this also existed when, and still exists with CBD, coffee berry borer, in using Bavaria bassiana, which is just like a fungus to combat the beetle. But these have now been expanded to include the fungicide for coffee leaf rust, which is extremely expensive. So that's another barrier to this. It is extremely expensive, and while this program exists, the producer the cost, and they are refunded the money. They're not given the money to then go out and buy this. But yeah, I mean, it's an incentive for them to use fungicides, and
which penalizes organic producers, which is totally unfair.
Yeah.
And makes zero sense. I mean, I get it. I studied plant genetics at university. It was really important to, at the time, for me to get over myself, because I was like, but why aren't we trying to find ways to help plants do their thing without interfering using chemicals,
right?
The reality of it is we got to feed the world.
Right.
I get it. I got over myself from that perspective. But now what we're saying in this situation is we're taking producers who have done the very hard thing of becoming organic coffee producers, and it is exorbitantly difficult to do organic coffee producing. As Jonas Fijerizo said on this podcast, he said, look, the organic producers I work with, they have to charge more because the way that they do their farming produces half the yield. So now what we're saying is, hey, organic coffee farmers, we get that it's really difficult to do this noble endeavor that you've gone on, but hey, fuck you, we're going to look for the quick solution. And anyone who decides to spray, we're going to support their endeavors. We're not really going to figure out a solution for you.
Yeah. Or it's been put on the back burner, and it's really frustrating for producers. I mean, not even just organic producers, but just producers who are like, I don't really want to spray this,
Right.
Like I said, that one who I spoke to who was just like, I just don't feel like I want to spray this after reading just a portion of the very lengthy guidelines for spraying all of this stuff. And so the question is like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Right. But what's worse, Madeleine, sorry to cut you off there, but what's worse is that they're cutting producers at the knees by saying, and we're not going to let you go and find other solutions. We're not going to let you go off and find other solutions. That's the part of this. Yeah. Right. We have to do it. We have to approve it. And it has to fit our agenda to get reelected.
Yeah. And it's a whole thing. And while I see, and I get encouraged by hearing about the things that are happening and the people who are working toward all of these things, it's just as quick and easy for me to kind of be disheartened by how slow moving the whole system is.
I can understand that.
Once you actually have a conversation with the producer who doesn't know what they're supposed to do right now.
Yeah.
And I've had, again, just earlier today, I had a conversation with a producer who was like, do you know what I should do? Like, what are other people doing? And I was just like, I gotta go start having some other conversations with people because I don't know right now.
Yeah.
This is what I know. What I know is that people are stump pruning and past that and spraying, which again, this producer I was talking to does not want to do that. It's like, I need to figure something else out because I don't know right now I don't know what the answer is. And this goes back to why I was like, oh, I need to start having conversations with some organic coffee producers to see really what they're doing and how it's working and how they're faring. It's a whole situation.
And this takes us back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode about the conversations that should be being had with different coffee producing regions. And because Hawaii has been so insulated and separated from the rest of the world, it's typically not, there's not a lot of information sharing that happens between those producers from, let's say, Colombia and from Honduras, who have been horribly impacted by coffee leaf rust, who have probably got a lot of solutions that could fast track all of this. But I don't hear of many conversations that are happening between producers in Hawaii and producers who have come before this. It's not difficult to make happen either.
Yeah, I mean, I think some individuals are. So we actually work with a couple of coffee producers who have connections, I forget where, somewhere in Latin America. And they were like, oh, immediately our friends there sent us this document when they found out we had rust. And they have been since implementing these practices just to increase the health of their coffee and make sure that they have good soil and healthy systems and all of this stuff. And they are one farm where the impact has been so minimal on them so far that they're not really concerned.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I mean, as soon as they started implementing this and seeing positive results, they told us, they're like, we're seeing really good things. Here's this document. It's in Spanish, but there might be an English version that exists out there. And there is an English version that exists out there. And so we found it and we're like, we need to start sending this to everybody. That didn't get distributed widely by these other agencies though. And it's like, why are we not sharing this document of information that here's this farm that saw positive outcome and positive results?
Do me a favor, send it to me. We'll include it as a downloadable link on this episode of the podcast so that if any producers want to get access to it, we'll make it easy for them to download and get access to if you want to. Is that something that you can do?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. I'll make sure that it's in the show notes because, we all got to do whatever we can to get the information out there. Mm-hmm. What happens as we wrap up this series? What happens next? What's the next steps to getting this sorted?
I guess it kind of depends on what approach you want to take, right? There's the wait and see, kind of like what these agencies and organizations can do and how quickly they can do it. There's the let's kind of just operate under the radar and use what we have and do what we can. And there's the other approach of I'm just gonna get out of coffee and be done with it, and I can't do this kind of a thing, And I think that those are the three different things I see happening right now. Those are the decisions people are making. And some people are doing multiple things, and that also works. And I think that it's good that we have multiple approaches because it's also interesting to see who falls into what approach. Similar to what you were saying actually in this podcast a lot during the pandemic, those business owners who actually don't want to do this anymore, this is their opportunity to get out. Yeah. And those coffee producers
with dignity,
who don't really want to do this anymore, this is their opportunity to be like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And it's too much for me. I'm getting older. I don't have the next generation to take over this farm. So I'm just going to get out and be done with it and sell this property. So I see that being as a very, real solution for folks. And I see people who are playing both games of I'm going to work within the system and outside the system. And I'm going to do this other thing and also still help move these other things forward. And
this is definitely one of those things that we don't know how this is going to turn out at all.
Yeah.
Madeleine, it is always such an honor to have you on this podcast. I love the way that your brain works and I like the way that you articulate what your brain is trying to solve. So thank you for gracing us with your wisdom and giving us some insight into what's going on with Coffee Leaf Rust. We will have to revisit this probably in 6 months to 12 months and see how things are progressing. So I hope you'll come back and check it out. At least help us figure out what's going on then. Now, if anybody would like to connect with you or PCR, how do they do that?
You can send me an email, Madeleine@pcr.coffee or info@pcr.coffee. If you can't spell Madeleine because it's a name
got an extra E.
Yeah. Just Google Madeleine spelled the French way, and that's the way.
Alternatively, we can put it in the show notes. How about we do that?
That also works out. I also do manage our social media channels. So if you send a message to @pcr.coffee on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook. We have a Twitter account that I have not logged into in a very long time, so don't use Twitter.
Better for you, darling. Twitter is a bitch fest.
But if you contact us on any of the other social channels, I'm usually the one who's responding there, and because I am the one who's managing those. So you can also reach out to us there and chat with us.
There will be links in the show notes to everything, including the articles that we spoke about in previous episodes in this series, the document that we spoke about that was translated into English, your email address and social media outlets that people can get in contact with you on. Awesome. Thank you again, Madeleine.
Thank you, Lee, for having me.
My pleasure. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.